Do you know that the only reason you were able to click on this video is because of a small action by Justin Timberlake 20 years ago? A small action that went on to have enormous consequences. In 2004, at the end of the Super Bowl halftime show, Justin Timberlake tore Janet Jackson's costume and exposed her chest live on television to 90 million people. The day after the Super Bowl, some PayPal employees were frustrated when they couldn't find a video of the incident. Their frustration sparked the creation of the very website we're both on right now. While YouTube was a positive byproduct, Timberlake didn't create it, but he did certainly have a hand in the destruction of the careers of some legendary performers. After the performance, Jackson's career was eviscerated and she received massive backlash. And despite the fact that Timberlake was fully on board and was the one who actually tore the costume, he received no backlash at all. In fact, he used the media circus around the event to promote his new solo career, even lying to the public and press, claiming he didn't know anything prior and blamed everything on Jackson. And it must have stung Jackson even more, given that in 1998, she gave the then unknown Timberlake and NSYNC their first American tour when she invited them to be her opening act on her Velvet Rope tour. The aftermath of the Super Bowl is just one of the many examples of Timberlake not only lying to escape consequence, but also using others to further his own career, and dropping them when they no longer are beneficial to him. Recently, however, the public's opinion of Timberlake has taken a dramatic turn, and all of his behavior has finally caught up to him. People are not only calling Timberlake out for his current day awful behavior like drunk driving, but they're also looking back at past controversies and seeing them in a whole new light. And there is so much more to this story, involving shocking revelations, the FBI, Star Wars, scores of celebrities, shady government involvement, some stories you've never heard before, and the largest Ponzi scheme in US history. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. The controversies of Justin Timberlake, from the fraud and scams that funded the beginning of his career, how he betrayed his fellow NSYNC members from the very beginning, everything to do with Britney Spears and his treatment of her, his horrendous behavior behind the scenes, and his many, many lies. So sit back, relax, grab a drink and a snack, and let's dive in to the controversies, lies, and justified downfall of Justin Timberlake. So before we get into the current day controversies of Justin Timberlake, the DUI, the revelations in Britney Spears' book, his horrendous behavior behind the scenes, and much more, we need to look back at Justin's past controversies because his behavior is very much a pattern. While there are many people out there who don't know anything about Justin Timberlake, my audience is primarily millennials and older, so I'm sure nearly all of you know the story of Justin Timberlake. That he was born in Memphis, that he did many pageants as a child, winning thousands of dollars regularly, he was on Star Search, and his mother took him to many, many auditions trying to make her son famous. Probably the best known trivia about Justin Timberlake is how he got his big break in being cast on Disney Channel's The Mickey Mouse Club, which filmed in Orlando, Florida. He starred alongside many other future stars, including his soon-to-be fellow NSYNC member JC Chasez, Ryan Gosling, who we'll also talk about later, Christina Aguilera, Kerry Russell, and the most famous former Mouseketeer, who Justin would go on to date, Britney Spears. And we'll of course be discussing Britney much more later in the video. Another future boy band member, Nick Carter, was actually cast alongside Timberlake, but Carter actually turned down the role so that he could join a band. You may have heard of them. They're called the Backstreet Boys. We'll of course be discussing much more about the Backstreet Boys later in the video too, as they are extremely relevant to the early days of NSYNC and Timberlake. Justin and Britney joined the Mickey Mouse Club in 1993 and filmed for 2 years in Orlando. The show was actually cancelled in 1994, but it did air until 1996 due to the way they filmed the episode in large batches back to back. After the Mickey Mouse Club was cancelled, Justin Timberlake's mother, Lynn Harness, went searching for her son's next big break. He did spend some time after the show writing songs with his former and future collaborator JC Chazet, and in 1994 he got a phone call that brought him right back to the Sunshine State. Justin and his mother had received a call from a Universal Studios employee called Chris Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick had called Timberlake to offer him a spot in a group that he was putting together. Chris had been actually approached himself by another man who had been impressed with Chris's voice and had pitched him a proposition. The man told Chris that if he could put together a vocal group, the man would fund it. He laid down a few guidelines for Chris to follow. The group should be all young, they should all be guys, they should all be good looking, they should all have excellent voices, and preferably they could dance or at least be taught to dance. And the group should be made up of 3 or 5 members, preferably 5. The man told Chris, follow these guidelines, bring this group to me, and I will make you stars. I will invest in you. I will help you quit your jobs, rehearse, give you somewhere to stay, pay for singing, dancing coaches, studio time. I will pay for equipment, for your records to be pressed. I will sort it all. Chris asked the man why he wanted to do this. Well, I've done it before, he said. I already have a successful group, and they're so successful that I just know someone is going to copy it. Someone's going to make their own group that's going to come in and be my group's competition. I made Coke. There's going to be a Pepsi around the corner. So I figured, what if I made the Pepsi too? Chris asked the man what the name of the group was. He turned to him and said, you've probably heard of them. They're called the Backstreet Boys. So there's a lot of different stories about the creation of NSYNC because some stories have changed over time and there's some things that people say that contradict things that other people say, but we're just going to go over some of the important context that was happening around the band's creation and also around their first couple of years because it is important for what we're going to talk about later on in the video. And it is also important to talk about their manager, Lou Pearlman, who is a deep dive in himself, but he is a massive, massive fraudster. So this was all going on at the same time that NSYNC was forming and going through their initial rise. So as I said, Lou Pearlman, who was their manager, ends up recruiting Chris Kirkpatrick from Universal Studios. He ends up calling Justin Timberlake. Justin ends up asking JC to join the group because he knew him from the Mickey Mouse Club. And then they end up bringing in Joey Fatone, who Chris knew from Universal. And then they get their 5th member who also worked at Universal at the time, Jason Galassis. And you may think that's wrong, that's not the 5th member of NSYNC, but he was the original 5th member. There was another member called Brody who I don't really know anything about apart from JC refused to join the group unless this Brody guy was removed from the group. I only know about him because he's mentioned in some of the court documents that we're going to get into, and the court documents are insane. There's so much information in all of them, and I've linked everything with a very, very, very detailed timeline that took me days in the sources. So anything that I'm saying or any of the additional information is always in the description box and the pinned comment. So of course, Jason ends up leaving the group right as they're about to sign their contract. And I don't want to tell you quite yet why Jason left the group because that will be really relevant in a little minute. Although when Jason left the group, he did issue what would turn out to be a very prophetic warning involving their wealthy investor, Lou Pearlman. But as I said, we'll get into that in just a second. So they end up bringing in Lance Bass, and that's the 5th member. They're good to go. They decide on their name, which when they first sang together, they sounded NSYNC, and they choose the spelling of NSYNC because it actually was the last letter of all of the original members' name, and that's why sometimes they call Lance Lanston because they'd use the N in Jason and not the E from Lance.
No, that name was made up by Lynn, Justin's mom, and it's the last letter of all of our first names.
Right.
So yeah, that's why Lance is not really Lanston. But anyway,
right. Yep. Were you there then when Lynn came up with that, or when somebody first brought like, hey, NSYNC, this is going to be our name, or do you remember anything about how that was presented to you?
Yeah, I remember actually being at the house and Lynn kind of coming up to all of us and like, I don't know if we're watching a movie or something, or because we hung out a lot too. We watching some movie, I forgot what it was, but I think she came up and said, hey, I have a great idea for your name. She presented it to us, and it was like, wow, okay, that's an incredible idea.
So awesome. They sign their contract. They are all being funded by Lou. He is paying for accommodation for Justin Timberlake and his mom, and they also have houses where they all live together at one stage, and Lou's paying for dancing and singing lessons, and they're just trying to make this work, rehearsing really crazy hours. And this is in Orlando, and a lot of their rehearsal is taking place in big blimp storage places, so we'll get into why that was in a second. But it's hot, obviously, as someone who lives in Florida for over half my life. Yes, it gets really hot there. So they're trying to make this work. And at this time, Backstreet Boys is really starting to get notice and get out there with their songs and everything. And Lou actually keeps NSYNC a secret for quite a long time. Anytime he's expensing anything, he's calling them B5 on like all of the records. So for a long time, nobody else really knew about NSYNC. And to start with, NSYNC actually got their launch in Europe because at this time in the early and mid 90s, with the exception of New Kids on the Block, there wasn't really much of a boy band scene, and it wasn't something that was super popular in the US. So Backstreet Boys did this too. They went to Europe first. They released their album in Europe first, and NSYNC did the same thing. So at this time, they're not making any money because Lou is paying for everything, but all of them have quit their jobs to really focus on trying to make this band work. Well, all of them weren't making any money except for Joey kept his job at Universal Studios for quite a while, and Justin and his mother had a different negotiation with Lou, and Justin was actually being paid even though he was 14, 15 when this was all happening, and the other members were all adults. So NSYNC are working away trying to make this band happen, and we're going to jump forward a little bit to their first big bit of US traction, which was actually because of the Backstreet Boys. The Backstreet Boys were supposed to do a Disney concert, and they had to pull out because they were very burnt out, but mainly because one of the members, Brian, was getting open heart surgery, and he obviously needed time to recover from that. So NSYNC ended up stepping in for the Backstreet Boys, and this was definitely the moment that they started their upward trajectory, because this concert was very successful and the Disney Channel aired it on repeat for weeks afterwards. So NSYNC really started to blow up after this concert. So things are going really well for them. They're selling their music, they're doing concerts, they're interviewed, magazines, merch, all of those things. And they actually hadn't been paid yet for everything that they were doing. And their manager, Lou Pearlman, was hyping up their check presentation, which was basically he was keeping all of the revenue, and then they were going to have this check presentation where he would cut each of them a check, and it would just be for a lump sum. Pearlman had made his fortune in the aviation and blimp industry, and then he had moved into music, and obviously with the Backstreet Boys and then NSYNC, and he had a bunch of other groups that some we'll talk about in a second. And he was really, really wealthy. He had this massive, massive mansion where a lot of the, not just Backstreet Boys and NSYNC members lived, but lots of his group members lived. And he had, Rolls Royces and all these fancy cars and boats and everything. And he just was one of those people too that lived very lavishly. So he used to take them to super fancy dinners at these hard to get into steakhouses, and that is what he did for the check presentation. He took them to this restaurant and handed out the checks, And a lot of the members of the band and their parents have spoken about this check presentation in the documentary on YouTube, actually, called The Boy Band Con. And I'm going to touch on a bit of the stuff that's covered, but mainly I want to point out things that they very much glossed over in the Boy Band Con, or they didn't talk about at all. And that check presentation was kind of a light bulb moment for them, because they ended up opening these checks that they thought were going to be for at least well into the six figures. And some of them were talking about maybe even seven figures. And they opened the checks, and inside was a check for $10,000. This is for over 2 years of work. So even at minimum wage, this doesn't make sense, considering not only were they not working for minimum wage, but they were having these massive successful concerts and albums, and merch alone should have been more than $10,000. So at this moment, they all said they knew something was wrong, and they knew that whatever Lou had been telling them wasn't what was really going on, and that he in some way was cheating them out of their money. Perlman, who had always seemed so generous, supportive, and kind, was not who he seemed to be. And not only were the 5 members of NSYNC, including Justin Timberlake, contracted with Perlman, but Justin Timberlake's mother, Lynn Harness, was also tied up in business dealings with Perlman. After they received their checks, they knew something was wrong, and they needed to find out exactly what. One of the things you probably are thinking is, well, what does their contract say? Well, according to the Boy Band Con, they couldn't afford to get a lawyer to look at the contracts, and they blindly trusted Lou Pearlman. But that isn't actually true. They actually were warned by multiple people after multiple lawyers told them this contract that Lou had given them was horrendous and they shouldn't sign it. And unfortunately, the contract with NSYNC, the contract with Backstreet Boys, the contract with Britney Spears' original group that was managed by Lou Pearlman, those were all just the tip of the iceberg. And there was far worse things going on behind the scenes with Lou Pearlman. So I know we're getting a bit into NSYNC lore here, but I do think it's important context for later. So I just want to wrap up what ended up happening with Lou Pearlman, because everything that went on during this time period very much laid the foundation for Justin Timberlake and who we see today with the DUIs and his treatment of other people, how he uses them and tosses them aside when they can no longer benefit his career or benefit him financially. And that is especially prominent when you look at how he treats real, regular people, people that he comes in contact with for work, on sets, that sort of thing, because he allegedly is an absolute nightmare to deal with. And we will be going into some details about that in a second. But I do just want to wrap everything up with this kind of first phase of NSYNC. Just some things to mention before we go into the chapter that is important context. I will make reference to a group called Innocence, which is Lou Pearlman's only girl group. This group actually had Britney Spears as an original member because in 1996, she actually auditioned for Pearlman, and when she auditioned, he gave her a place in the band but wanted her to sign the contract that day. And Britney said no, and she wanted to kind of mull things over because she still was thinking about being a solo artist. And she took about 9 months to kind of decide, because obviously it's a huge decision. And of course, as we know, she didn't end up signing with Pearlman. And in the summer of 97, she told Pearlman, I don't want to be in the group anymore, and I'm going to go in another direction. So then she ended up later that year, of course, signing and doing Hit Me Baby One More Time. And the rest is history there. But we will be talking much more about Britney in a few minutes because we're going to get into the whole peak of Justin and Britney and everything that went on with their relationship and everything just in general about that. But there's also another member of Innocence that I wanted to mention because she'll come up in the chapter, and that is Nikki DeLoach. She actually was also a Mouseketeer in the Mickey Mouse Club with Justin and Britney. So she's featured in the Boy Band Con, which again is the documentary on YouTube that Lance Bass produced. Also, the executive producer was a guy called Johnny Wright, and Johnny is the former NSYNC and Backstreet Boys manager. He was very involved with Lou Pearlman's bands and Lou Pearlman. Johnny actually even managed Britney at one point, Janet Jackson, and he was brought in by Pearlman because he was managing New Kids on the Block. And Johnny was very involved with everything that Pearlman did in the music industry because obviously Pearlman didn't really know anything about the music industry. He brought Johnny in to do the actual groundwork of being a manager. And Johnny also brought in his wife at the time, Donna Wright, and she was also both involved with NSYNC and Backstreet Boys as a manager. So it is important to remember, I will touch on things not spoken about in the Boy Band Con, and it is because when you're talking about events or things that happen and the people that were involved in those events are the people making the documentary, they're going to obviously put things from their point of view. And there's that saying that I always mention in videos that, there's three sides to a story: person A's, person B's, and what actually happened. And they're obviously not going to put in anything that makes them look bad or look stupid or anything that puts them in a negative light. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about here were left out of the Boy Band Con or may contradict some things in the Boy Band Con because they obviously are trying to paint themselves in a certain light and make themselves sympathetic characters. And of course, anything that I am talking about that contradicts what they've presented is linked in the sources, and that does include everything with these lawsuits. So let's finish up the NSYNC lawsuit so we can get on to everything else. So when they had this check presentation, they knew something was wrong. They ended up bringing the contract to JC's uncle, who was a lawyer. And I remember when I watched the Boy Band Con, I thought, why didn't you do that before if it was your uncle? And they do talk a lot about how they couldn't afford a lawyer and they were young and everything like that. And I totally understand. They were young, everybody does dumb things when they're young, or you're just even ignorant about how business and things work. And of course, also, we've all been in situations where we've been broke and there's things that we wanted to do or should have done or really would have been stupid not to do, but we couldn't do those things because we couldn't afford them. But my thought process before I found out all this stuff that I'm going to talk about, I even was thinking, that just doesn't sound plausible that 5 people, not one of those 5 people or their parents, because again, most of them are in their late teens, early 20s, and nobody said, hang on a second, let's take this to a lawyer. So I did find that hard to believe, and it's because they did have a lawyer look at it, which we'll get to in a second, but also the fact that they're saying they couldn't afford it. I mean, there's 5 of them. They have identical contracts. They'd probably be looking at $500. I would have thought they could come up with $100 each, especially considering Justin Timberlake was just on the Mickey Mouse Club. And he also was in tons of pageants before this that had huge amounts of money that he won. There was one alone that was $16,000. I've seen tons of them that were in that sort of area of money that he was winning. And also, Lou Pearlman was paying for everything, not only for each of the band members, but he was paying for a house and all of the bills for Justin Timberlake's mom and paying for her to fly back and forth from Memphis to see her husband to Orlando. And Justin Timberlake's stepdad was a banker, so they're making decent money. Justin Timberlake's had all this money from the Mickey Mouse Club and all of those pageants, and his mom is getting everything paid for along with him, so they're offsetting a lot of expenses, and there's not money to go and see a lawyer. That's because there was money. They did go see a lawyer, and it is in the court documents, and it's even Lynn Harness, Justin Timberlake's mom, that says we took this contract to a lawyer. So she talks about the fact that her husband and her took this contract to a lawyer in Memphis, and where she talks about this, it's in her statement that's 19 pages long. Everything else in the statement has tons of detail. Every minute thing, like it's a long list of everything that she and Justin and Lou Pearlman and all the band members, everything that they did to start NSYNC and how they were getting the word out and rehearsals and everything. And yet the bit about the lawyer is a line that says, yeah, I took the contract to a lawyer and they made little comment on it. And that's not, they said nothing. That's not, they said, yeah, it's cool to sign it. But I do find it very interesting that everything else has all this detail, and yet she didn't say what the lawyer said, because little comment could be, yeah, sign it, it looks great. Or it could be, this is a horrendous contract, don't sign it. So why was there no detail, and why is it this situation always presented as if no lawyer saw it? But we don't know exactly what the lawyer said. So we can't say exactly they were warned, they knew this was a bad contract. But we actually can, because there was another lawyer that looked at this contract. And if you remember a few minutes ago, when I was talking about the original fifth member, Jason, he actually left the group because of the contract. He went the day that the contract was being signed, he went to the group and said, I am not signing this contract. It is a terrible contract. You shouldn't sign it. And I'm going to have to leave the group because I'm not signing it. So Jason had taken it to a lawyer, and the lawyer told him, this is horrendous. Don't do it. So Jason ended up leaving the group over it.
Well, so, I'm still with the other group at this point in time. So I get presented with the contract from that side.
Oh, so they presented you with something first?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so, I was not going to sign anything until I saw everything. And so then I got the contract from Lou, and it was just, I took them both to a lawyer to have them checked out. And it was just, the contract from the other group, which is pretty much an industry standard contract. And, nothing really kind of funny about it, whatever. But the Lou Pearlman contract, he had himself written into the group, not only for what he could recoup, but what he would get. He also had himself written in there as the sixth member of the group. So it was just, and it was like thick as a phone book. So of course I'm involving my parents in this, trying to get, everything, trying to figure it out.
And did you have any other conversations? I mean, yeah, it's like, I guess, well documented now, like, what kind of contract that he had, but you guys, obviously you're just being presented with this, and like, it's really cool. You're at this house and you're like, it's really exciting. You're working with vocal coaches and doing all this. So like, what were any of the other guys, did they have any reservations? Like, did you guys have any conversations like that about any of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we did. I don't remember, details about the conversations. I remember, of course, we're going to have conversations about it, and I think the other guys are more just, kind of whatever about it. Not really, flipping about it, but just kind of like, go ahead and sign it and, no big deal. And I was kind of like, always been kind of cautious about things like that.
And there's also other people that were in this Lou Pearlman band network who did the same thing.
When you come back after this little break, you gotta have him sign.
Every band he's created so far says he's crooked, and they're leaving and they're suing him. He's the guy giving you the paperwork to sign with his company, and you're like, what do we do? You're not
There is a member of Innocence, the woman I was saying was also a Mouseketeer with Britney and Justin, Nikki DeLoach. She, in the boy band Con, actually says, I took the contract that was exactly the same as NSYNC's and Backstreet Boys. I took it to my entertainment lawyer, and he said, do not sign this under any circumstances. And she signed it.
I took it to my entertainment attorney, and he literally looked at me and said, you will be committing career suicide if you sign this. And I signed it.
And if you've watched the Boy Band Con, you may have noticed this, but I'm going to flag it for anyone who hasn't seen it. There is a pattern with the people who are speaking about the stuff like this, like being very truthful about what really went on.
My attorney had told me this is a bad contract, but it's a record contract. His exact words were, I don't know how many more of these you're gonna see.
He did
And those people are pretty much everybody that's not NSYNC or Backstreet Boys, the people who didn't have the massive global crazy career. And you will see this pattern continue when we talk in a minute about the really horrendous stuff that Lou Pearlman did, because the Boy Band Con very much focuses on the financial stuff with NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, which, don't get me wrong, it's awful what he did and it's horrible that they lost all this money and they worked so hard. But there is much, much worse things that Lou Pearlman did, and they were very glossed over in the Boy Band Con. But we'll get into that in a second. To wrap up the lawsuit bit, sorry I'm jumping all over the place. It's just because there's so many different things going on and so many different groups and things happening, and it's just really a lot. Look at the sources, especially the timeline. You'll see there's a lot going on. So when they were going through all of this and trying to get out of the deal, Backstreet Boys had already filed their lawsuit. They actually filed their lawsuit before NSYNC released their debut album in the US. They did release the album in Europe before that. Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, they didn't go about things in the same way. Backstreet Boys filed multiple lawsuits actually, but it was Brian that really kind of led the charge with this. And NSYNC, they instead found this loophole where Lou Pearlman had to sign them to a US record deal, and he only had like this finite amount of time to do it. And he had signed them to a German label, so that time was almost up, and he hadn't signed them to an American one. So NSYNC basically went to Jive Records, and they were just going to sign a contract with them and go ahead. So the fact that Pearlman found out about it and realized that what was going on, he ended up filing a lawsuit against NSYNC, and it was for $150 million. NSYNC countersued for $25 million, and the argument that Pearlman made was he was NSYNC. It was his brand. He brought them, put them together, made them, paid for everything, and NSYNC, the brand, belonged to him. And he had also built into all of the contracts this sixth man clause, which, because pretty much all his bands were 5 members. And so basically all of the money that would go to the band members would be split 6 ways and not 5, and he was that 6th member. And even though he had this 6-man thing built into the contract, he was taking all of the money, paying all of the bills, but also taking out a management fee and other fees for himself. And then what was left, he was then splitting it 6 ways, taking another chunk for himself. So he was like triple dipping into the money and getting paid insane amounts. Like he was earning 10 million to the band members earning like 300,000. It was that much of a difference. So as I said, there's multiple lawsuits. There's a lot of complicated stuff. Maybe that's a topic for another video, maybe an in-depth dive into Pearlman, if that's something that you'd want to see. There is a Netflix series coming out about him at the end of this month though, so maybe that will cover things a lot more than the Boy Band Con did. The lawsuit got wrapped up on December 30th, 1999. And so the result of the lawsuit is the judge actually says that she doesn't agree with Pearlman that he's NSYNC because her daughter has NSYNC's poster on her wall and it's the 5 guys, obviously. So she ends up siding with NSYNC, and they are let out of the contract. They end up signing with Jive Records. While they were allowed out of their contract and to move on, there was an out-of-court settlement, and that really is how things ended. But they've never discussed that publicly, what ended up happening. Pretty much they just moved over to Jive. They ended up releasing No Strings Attached, which was based on the whole ordeal with PEARLMAN. And then they went on for the next 2 years to be super successful, one of the biggest boy bands in the world, making crazy money, selling merch, concert tickets, crazy amounts of singles and albums, and on posters, magazines, they were everywhere. But just to completely end things with PEARLMAN, in the Boy Band Con, they very, very lightly touch on a lot of the accusations about PEARLMAN and him being a pedophile, because it apparently, allegedly, was very much an open secret what he used to do, because there's been scores and scores of people over the years who've spoken about the fact that PEARLMAN was a pedophile and a predator, and he went into the music industry, a lot of people say, to surround himself with good-looking men. Hey guys, Editing Ash here. One thing that I forgot to point out is just how uncomfortable it is looking back on all this stuff and seeing how sexualized like a lot of these boy bands were, especially when you consider how young the vast majority of them were. But especially Nick Carter and Justin Timberlake, they were like 12, 13, 14 when this stuff was happening and the bands were getting their first, breaks. And it's really bad. Like, I just think that obviously when I was seeing this stuff, like, I was a teenager myself and I didn't think about that sort of thing. When I've gone back and looked now for the video, it's just so disturbing. And then when you add on top all of the allegations with Lou Pearlman, it's really, really disturbing and creepy. And especially considering Justin Timberlake's mom was so involved. And I just don't understand that being okay with your child being really sexualized in the media. And it's not like, oh, there's the odd picture in like a magazine with their shirts off, which we shouldn't be doing that for 14-year-olds anyway. But this is like another level. Like, all the music videos are, water and just very, very over the top. And there's all these promotional materials where they have like their pants undone and things. It's just so bizarre to me. And again, knowing everything that we know about Lou Pearlman, it seems crystal clear that his motivations for getting into the music industry and the boy bands especially is because he wanted to be surrounded by these young, good-looking guys. And I just think it's awful that any of them were put in this position, because they all were pretty young, but especially Nick Carter and Justin Timberlake, who were barely teenagers, like in 8th grade, freshmen in high school. And I know I haven't really spoken about Backstreet Boys and Nick Carter and Aaron Carter, because he was with Lou Pearlman from when he was very, very, very young. And I know there's a whole can of worms with the Carters in general, and especially Nick Carter and allegations. And it's not that I'm ignoring that. It's just that is such a broad, deep subject that I think it needs its own video. I don't want to, do a little 5-minute section in this one. So that is a possibility for a video for another day if people are interested in seeing that. So I'll have to see how this video does. But if you want to see that, just let me know in the comments. And one other thing to mention, instead of putting, I'm sure there'll be other editing sections, because ADHD, I always forget things because I go off on tangents when I go off script. But the other thing, just to include it here, is that Lou Pearlman did actually making the band, because when NSYNC and Backstreet Boys left him, he was looking at the next thing he could do. And obviously reality TV was starting to become a thing then, and boy bands were starting to go out. So it was like he was trying to use the last bit of boy band phenomena to tap into this new thing that was taking off with reality TV. So O-Town is the band that came out of that. And I haven't looked at boy band anything since I had to pretend I was interested in them when I was a teenager because I was much more interested in Britney Spears. But the O-Town member, Ashley, even I can say he is a beautiful, beautiful man. And his whole thing now seems to be being a beautiful man on Instagram. And good for you, Ash. Like, you know, if you're blessed that way and you can make a career out of it, then go for it. So I actually think that he just seems like a little golden retriever man. So unless there's something controversial that I don't know about him. So just a bit of additional context there. I really hope that you're going to see this video today or tomorrow. It is 3:30 on the 14th of July, Sunday. So really hoping to get this up soon, but back to past me. There were a couple of people, again, who touched on this in the boy band con. They talked about being massaged and touched inappropriately, like on the shoulders, and how he used to come into their rehearsals and ask them to take their shirts off and just was creepy in that way. But that is the kind of extent of the coverage in the boy band con. There is one member of LFO that they play an interview that he did, and he spoke about how Perlman propositioned him. Perlman told Rich Cronin, who was the member of LFO,
he goes, all he wants to do is touch your penis. Oh. And I don't know what happens after that. Just pretty much touch it, you know, play with it.
That's Luke Perlman then said to Rich Cronin,
I don't want you to get freaked out. We got to do what's right for the band. And so I'm going to let you practice on me so that we don't go over there and blow this deal.
And there are so many more allegations. There's a really good article. It's a little bit older now, but obviously it's all still relevant. It's in Vanity Fair, and they really, really went over a lot of the details that weren't covered in the boy band con. And they even spoke to people that worked in Perlman's house who they would warn all of these boys and tell them, do not go in his room, like, don't be alone with him. And they even, in a way, like, tried to intervene to stop Perlman being alone with any of them. And there's so many awful things that he did. He was showing, like, really young teenagers pornography, and he would have this really elaborate camera system in his house, and he just was recording people at all times.
And he'd always say that, oh yeah, you know, the NSYNC girls come over here in town all the time, and you can see right in there from here, you know, stuff like that. You know, oh yeah, I got every channel that you could ever imagine here, even the porn channels.
He even put cameras in his sunbed so that when people would go in there and get undressed, he had all the footage.
I didn't know this at the time, but you know, you take your clothes off to get in the tanning bed. He was recording, so he would show all the boys the video of us girls getting naked and getting into the tanning bed. That felt pretty darn violating.
There was loads of other stuff like this, and he just was an absolute creep.
You know, Lou would come into the rehearsal room and he'd be like, hey, guys, let's see your abs, take off your shirts. You gotta be able to sell teen magazines. You gotta be in good shape, take off your shirt. Let me see your abs.
And there's so many people who have said this was very well known. It was like an open secret.
College, I can give your muscles a pump without you even working out. Come here, let me rub your muscles. So then it kind of starts turning into this weird massage. And then all the red flags start popping up like, oh, this is kind of what everybody's been talking about.
And it's just one of those things where it's interesting that all of these other people, hundreds of people, saw all of this stuff. There's no doubt in these people's mind. They all have the same stories, talking about exactly the same situations. And there's even people speaking about members of the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and their parents and finding pictures and all of this stuff. It's all in the Vanity Fair article below and other articles. But everybody else saw this stuff, but not NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. Those 10 are the only 10 who never saw anything. So I will let you decide whether you think, is it because they really didn't see anything, or is it because they don't want to risk their money, careers, whatever it may be. So not only was Perlman the biggest creep alive, but the financial fraud and situations with NSYNC and Backstreet Boys was the absolute tip of the iceberg, because Lou Pearlman for decades was scamming people out of hundreds of millions of dollars. He ran nothing but scams pretty much his entire business life. He actually ran the largest and longest Ponzi scheme in US history, because half of his companies that he was getting all these $100 million loans from banks, and he was taking money from primarily retirees and elderly people in Florida. He took all of that money and was giving people shares in companies, but half of these companies didn't exist, and the other half were worthless. He had this aviation company that he said he had hundreds of planes, and he didn't have any, because what he actually did, this is how much of a scammer this guy was, is that he went with model planes to the New York airport. And again, it's like the 70s and 80s, so the camera quality wasn't amazing. And he would stand here, say, this is the runway in front of me. And he would take the model planes and hold them by the tail and take the camera and take a picture as if the plane was landing or as if it was taking off, and just cropped out the bit where he's got his fingers on the model plane, which just, like, that is an unreal level of fraud and scams. And he also was just doing so much shady stuff. Like, he was telling people, oh yeah, you're investing in Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and he was just taking all the money. Like, it just, that is how he was paying for his whole life. In the boy band con, where they talk a lot about, you know, the expensing and things like that, you can not justify it, but that does happen in business. Like, people do expense trips and all of that stuff, but this was just another level. Like, he was literally just transferring millions of dollars to his own personal bank account. And he was such a scammer that he even scammed the lawyers that he used for the NSYNC and Backstreet Boys lawsuits, because as I said before too, this wasn't just one Backstreet Boys and one NSYNC lawsuit. There was dozens and dozens of them. And there was also the Aaron Carter ones. And then tons of companies and other people started suing him when everybody was figuring out this was a Ponzi scheme. But he ended up being given a bill from his lawyers for like 16 million. And he sent them like a wire transfer from a bank in Germany, and the wire never showed up. And they found out like the bank didn't even exist, and he just like forged all this paperwork. And there was another company that was a modeling company. He owns loads of stuff. He even owned the Chippendales and restaurants and things. And this modeling company, they actually were investigated by the Attorney General's office long before everybody found out about what was really going on. This was even before like the band lawsuits and things, and he could have been stopped then. But this modeling company, there was a lot of scams like this in the 90s. Basically, they would go to like malls and just other places that teenagers would be, and they'd go up to people and say, oh, have you ever thought about modeling? And yeah, most people are flattered by that. Yes or no, doesn't matter what it is, they still go ahead with the pitch. And they would basically say, oh, I want to sign you to like this agency. And they would have the people pay this huge fee and then call them in to get headshots. And then they would say, oh yeah, we're going to be your agent. We're going to get you all this work. But the people would come and take the pictures, and that would be the end of it. There wouldn't even be people working trying to do anything for them. It was just a straight up scam. Like, get these people in, get their money, take their pictures, never contact them again. And when the Attorney General's office was investigating this, there came in a new Attorney General, Charlie Crist, who, boy, do I have some stories about him. All I will say about that is most people in the Tampa gay scene probably do. Lou Pearlman gave him a shitload of money when he was running for governor, which he did become the governor of Florida, and he now is a congressman. And this whole situation, in my opinion, allegedly, Lou Pearlman definitely bought his way out of this investigation, because when the Attorney General's office went into the offices, they saw all of the people that work there. You know, they're like, oh, this is our HR department, and these are our customer service, and these are the agents. And they had this whole tour. Okay, they left. The Attorney General's office was asked, okay, like, we're cool now. Like, you saw everything. Are we good? And they said no, because they totally thought it was staged, which it obviously was. There was no one working there. They said no, we still want to go ahead with the investigation. And the next thing they know, they're told, you're done. We're not looking into this anymore. So the modeling thing could have been caught way earlier. And the biggest amount of fraud definitely seemed to be around the elderly people that Pearlman was making like fake certificates, and he was completely just like making up and lying about everything, showing all these fake financial documents. And it was just to such a wild extent. Like, I've never seen anything like this. Obviously, this all starts catching up to him, and he is informed that he's being investigated. He's got all these lawsuits, and he decides, well, fuck, they're going to come and arrest me. So he leaves the country and goes on the run. And obviously there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people that have been screwed over by this guy. So there's a lot of people motivated to find him. And obviously they're putting out, you know, articles at this time, and it is blowing up because it's the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. And he actually ends up being found in Bali by just a random German tourist, calls into the FBI and tells them Lou Pearlman's in Bali. So the FBI go, arrest him, extradite him back to the US, and he is put on trial. That is when they realize this is the largest and longest Ponzi scheme in US history. And he was given 25 years in prison, which at that time was the longest prison term for like a white collar fraud case. And that record was broken by our old friend Elizabeth Holmes, who I honestly have to thank for giving me my first start with my channel. If you don't know much about her or don't know anything, I would recommend my Elizabeth Holmes video, which I'll link in the cards. One of the most insane cases of all time. Anyway, I'm going off on a side tangent, but I will link that card above. And obviously Sam Bankman-Fried now has been given the longest sentence. But at the time, it was Lou Pearlman. But he didn't even end up serving all of his sentence, because in August 2016, he passed away in prison in Florida. And now we're going to jump forward to the new millennium, the year 2000. NSYNC is releasing their new album, No Strings Attached, which that and the song was based on their whole ordeal with Pearlman. So we're going to get into that, the whole thing with Justin and Britney, and I'll also be sharing a never heard before story about Timberlake, as it involves my family member and their interaction and dealing with Justin Timberlake. And everything else that happened in the early and mid 2000s, including the Super Bowl. So let's get into the next chapter. As I said in the previous chapter, in the year 2000, NSYNC released their No Strings Attached album that was based on everything with Lou Pearlman. The year before, in 1999, Justin Timberlake started dating his former Mickey Mouse co-star, Britney Spears. And as we all know, pretty much from 1997, when she released her first single, Hit Me Baby One More Time, Britney Spears became one of the biggest pop stars in the world. And this time period is also when Justin Timberlake starts to develop this pattern of, I am going to use people for finances, for career prospects, and then when they're not useful to me any longer, I'm gonna cast them aside. He also starts to move into this area of, I can do whatever I want because I'm a rich celebrity. NSYNC had an interview with Rolling Stone in 2000 that was going over the whole Lou Pearlman situation and their new album. And in the article, Justin takes the interviewer out to his new car, which is this super souped up fancy BMW. And he tells the interviewer that the night before, he'd actually got a speeding ticket for going 80 miles an hour in a 50 zone. I'm not going to sit here and say I've never gone above the speed limit and I don't speed, but 80 in a 50, especially when you are a celebrity who can have a driver, like, where are you urgently rushing to? And he also justifies it, get it, by saying he knew there was no one around, which he couldn't possibly know. There could have been loads of people around. There could have been one person around. There could have been an animal around. And he just has no regard for anyone else. Again, I'm not saying he's this terrible, awful person because he was going 30 miles over the speed limit 20 years ago, but it is just another piece that feeds into the entire narrative and pattern that we're going to see throughout the rest of the video that results in present day, where he's getting DUIs and the way he treats Britney Spears, Janet Jackson, and also how he treats NSYNC, and the many, many, many people who have spoken about his horrendous behavior when it comes to anyone that basically isn't a rich celebrity. My audience is mainly US, UK, and Canadian based, and most of my audience, if not all of my audience nearly, is 25 and up, with most being 30, 35 and up. So I'm sure most of you remember the early 2000s and the insane attention that Justin and Britney got. Britney was the biggest pop star on the planet, and NSYNC was one of the biggest boy bands, so they really were a pop culture phenomenon. I think that the peak was when they had their first ever red carpet event and they went to the American Music Awards in the full matching denim outfits, and I'm sure everyone has seen the pictures that I'm putting on screen. If you haven't, please let me know in the comments, because I don't believe there's someone out there that hasn't seen this picture. But this was really the biggest thing at the time. Everybody is, you know, I was a teenager, so I'm sure older people at the time weren't, but everybody knew about and talked about Britney and Justin because they just were such a huge thing at that time. Everything seemed to be going great for them 2000, 2001, but then out of nowhere in 2002, March, I believe, Justin Timberlake broke up with Britney Spears. And at the time, there was a very different narrative put forth than what actually happened. And a lot of what really happened was cleared up only last year when Britney Spears released her book, The Woman in Me, and she went over a lot of what did actually happen. And there's no other way to put this than Justin Timberlake really treated Britney like garbage and turned the public against her. A lot of people forget that for a long time after Britney and Justin broke up, Britney was like booed everywhere she went.
In Mexico City 4 months later, a finger for the paparazzi.
Even interviews, like I'll show you clips, they were awful to her because Justin Timberlake put out this narrative that Britney Spears had cheated on him and that she was this evil woman who broke his heart, when in reality, the complete opposite was true. And he was cheating on her multiple times. And that is also another pattern that allegedly continued up until now.
This spasm of publicity about what happened from Mexico to London.
Ew, strawberry. Yeah, it was a weird time. Ew, can we stop?
So from January 2001, when they had their red carpet debut with the denim outfits, until February 2002, which the final appearances that they had together was the LA premiere of Britney's movie Crossroads, and there was a pre-Grammys red carpet appearance that they did in February 2002 as well, and those were the last times that they were together, photographed together by the media. And that year and a month, there was so much publicity and media attention, and they did basketball charity events together. Britney did her iconic performance at the MTV Video Music Awards, where she did I'm a Slave for You with the snake, and they just were everywhere in the media. So, as I said, it was a very abrupt, out of nowhere breakup, and Britney Spears herself, as she's detailed in her book and other media stuff that she's spoken about recently with the release of the book, she very much was blindsided by this. She has spoken about the fact that Justin Timberlake cheated on her many, many, many different times. She did, after being sick of him cheating on her multiple times and, full-blown like sleeping with people, she made out with her choreographer, Wade Robson, and Justin took that and basically put out this whole story about Britney cheating on him with Wade, but leaving out the whole he cheated on her multiple times. In her book, Britney says that Timberlake initiated the breakup while he was in the middle of making his first solo album, Justified, because he wanted ammunition for his album. Spears also wrote that he broke up with her via a text message while he was shooting a music video. Britney said the breakup was devastating and that she was crying and could barely speak for months. So they had broken up in March. Britney is going through this very difficult time, and in November 2002, Justin is getting a lot of attention for his album that's about to be released, and he ends up going on Barbara Walters with his mom, which I found incredibly strange because it was him presenting this whole, oh, I'm just this mommy's boy, and they have this whole interview where it's setting up this whole narrative of Britney Spears being this awful, evil woman who cheated on this poor, innocent, sweet mommy's boy and America's sweetheart. Just one thing to say about the Barbara Walters interview, I can't play this because of copyright, because it's music and it'll be picked up like that. But there is a point in the interview, it's awful interview, like they are so horrible to Britney Spears, but Justin Timberlake also plays a unreleased and unheard song on the piano to Barbara Walters that's called Horrible Woman, and it just is really implied that it's about Britney, and it's a really, really horrible song. Again, just like the Diane Sawyer interview, it's awful. And if you want to watch it, it is linked in the sources, both of them, but I wouldn't have wanted to watch this unless I had to for the video, because it was just horrible to especially see Britney like so upset, and she is so nice and kind to everyone that she speaks about in the video or she's asked about. And that just kind of is the story of the last 20 years, that she never goes after people. She's overly kind to them. And even when Justin was slating her in the media at this time, she was still saying, I don't blame him. I don't judge him. And he probably just, said it in the moment. So yeah, it's the interviews. I really, really didn't like them. Britney got a lot of backlash for this. She was constantly shouted out in public, booed wherever she went. And it was made even worse when Justin Timberlake released his single Cry Me a River, and the music video, especially because he hired a Britney Spears lookalike, and the whole music video is basically just again saying that narrative of Britney cheated on me and I'm this poor little sweetheart. In her book, when Britney is speaking about the Crimea River video, she talks about how much awful scrutiny she got from the media and from fans of Justin, who assumed that what he was saying in the music video, that she cheated, was true. Britney is quoted as saying, "In the news media, I was described as a harlot who'd broken the heart of America's golden boy. The truth, I was comatose in Louisiana and he was happily running around Hollywood." Again, in the book, she talks a lot about going to Lakers games and being booed and how difficult it was for her during the breakup, not only because they were going through the breakup, but because he had cheated on her so many times. And in the book, she's quoted as saying, "There were a couple of times during our relationship when I knew Justin had cheated on me, especially because I was so infatuated and so in love, I let it go."
He's left the impression that you weren't faithful, that you betrayed the relationship.
I think everyone has a side of their story. I'm not technically saying he's wrong, but I'm not technically saying he's right either.
So after a year of dealing with this, in November 2003, Britney goes on Diane Sawyer for an interview, and this interview is horrendous. Are awful to her. Diane Sawyer asks her such inappropriate and rude and just fucked up questions.
You don't like the famous bottom? Real famous?
Ew, don't say that. That's a very nice compliment. But I have my brother to always put me in check with that. 24/7. He's like, "Britney, you need to lose some weight."
So I'll play some clips here because honestly, it's really awful and I feel so bad for Britney. Knowing especially all the context too that we know now.
I was stunned to see a kind of recreation of their breakup.
When did you see it for the first time, the video?
I saw it. I was on vacation and someone called me and told me that it was going to come on, and I watched it and I was just like I went in this whole denial phase or whatever. But it's fine. That's the way I don't want to judge him or anything like that because that's the way he had.
And now, 6 years later, she's still constantly feeding the publicity monster. As much as she seeks the attention, does she worry that something's being given away?
Everyone now, they look back and they're like, "What happened to your sweet image that you used to be?" And I'm like, then when I came out, you thought I was too provocative. It's like you can never win. No matter what you do, at the end of the day, you can't please everybody.
Am I seeing what I think?
That's probably one of the moments that I like the best.
You can pop your knuckle.
Britney Spears is popping her knuckle.
How do you do that? I don't know.
In 2004, Britney released a song called Every Time, which now, after reading the book, we know that this song was, she says, inspired by an abortion that she had when she was with Timberlake. And she obviously went through a really difficult time dealing with this because according to Britney, she only went along with the abortion because Justin didn't want to be a father and he was saying he was too young. From their breakup until pretty much when she released her book, Britney always stayed very diplomatic and didn't really go after Justin in the same way that he did to her.
He's gone on television and pretty much said, "You broke his heart. You did something that caused him so much pain." What did you do?
I was upset. I was upset for a while.
We've never seen her attacking him publicly or talking about like very intimate things in their relationship because Justin Timberlake really started just going after her and then talking about things that were really inappropriate. And it was as if he knew that that was a thing that would get attention and would get people watching interviews and clicking on things.
It was a really weird time. There was like talk about what we did together and like really sexually and stuff. And I just felt very exploitive. As he going on these shows and they're asking him and he's talking, but I'm sure just like right now, you're asking me about it and I'm talking about it and just kind of.
Justin Timberlake is in the house. And I just want to ask you one question. Did you Britney Spears? Yes or no?
Oh, man.
Come on, man. Okay, I did it. No.
It was just something he knew was always a topic that was going to get some sort of attention and reaction out of people. And he played into it constantly whenever he needed attention for music being released or whatever it was, or even at events and things, because he would start to do things when she was going through her difficult period. He used that as well. And there was even an event where he implied that he was this concerned person for Britney. He didn't actually say her name, but he was heavily insinuating that he was speaking to her and asking her to stop drinking. I'll play the
Stop
clip here.
drinking. You know who you are. I'm speaking to you. Stop drinking. You're gonna get sloppy. You know who you are.
But it just was one of those things that it obviously was for attention, because if you really were concerned, you don't need to talk to her through the media. I'm sure you can send her a text message, considering you broke up with her over a text message. So it just was a lot of stuff like that, that it was bad at the time. But when you look back now, even with more context with the book and just everything in general, hindsight, it's so awful what he ended up doing. Like, he just used the relationship anytime he needed attention for a release, and he didn't think about how it was going to affect her seeing these things, or how it was going to affect her with what the media would do with all of this ammunition he was giving them. So in February 2001, nearly 20 years after the majority of this happened, Justin Timberlake issued an apology to Britney Spears for everything, and to Janet Jackson for everything that happened with the Super Bowl, which we spoke about at the very beginning of the video.
A few moments later.
I'd like to take this opportunity to apologize to absolutely nobody. You're thinking about the one, then you find out it's just a bitch.
The only reason he released this apology is because this was just when the documentary on Netflix, Framing Britney Spears, came out, and it very much spoke about everything that we're talking about in the video, how he treated Britney Spears, how he used her and their relationship, how he twisted what actually happened to put his own career forward and to propel himself into the spotlight, to get money, to get attention, all of those things. He used Britney and didn't care. And it was the same thing with Janet Jackson. As I spoke about in the very beginning of the video, he didn't care what happened to Janet Jackson. He was completely complicit with the Super Bowl performance. He knew everything that was happening. He was at the rehearsal. He was the one who tore the costume, and he completely stepped aside and let the media absolutely attack this legendary performer who had her career eviscerated overnight, basically. And she never recovered from this incident, because it was just constantly attack, attack, attack Janet Jackson. And Justin Timberlake, nobody said a word. And he didn't stick up for her. He didn't say, back off, I'm complicit too. He got what he wanted out of that performance. He got attention, he got money, he got some crazy deal with Nike. There's so many things. I could list 50 million that he got from that performance. And Janet Jackson, her reputation was destroyed. Her career took a hit that it never recovered from. And she got so many things taken away from her. She wasn't invited to the Grammys or tons of other awards. She wasn't put forward for things because of this. And she was pretty much blackballed. Justin Timberlake used Britney Spears and Janet Jackson to propel his own career forward, to get more money, to get more attention, to get whatever it was that he wanted in that moment. And he didn't care about either of them. He didn't care what happened to either of them. He didn't care what people ended up booing them or saying horrible things. He didn't care about all this ammunition that he was giving the media to go and attack these two women who Britney had obviously gone through a difficult time period. And so had Janet Jackson after the Super Bowl incident because she was treated terribly as well. And the other people that Justin Timberlake really screwed over was NSYNC, because not only did he leave the group and kind of blindsided them, he didn't even tell them that he was gonna leave and make music. So he basically said he was going on a break, and they all pursued some solo projects, and he never came back after not telling them that he was going to do his own music. So NSYNC have never been able to go on tour or even use their own name or anything like that to this day. I know they did reunite for that Trolls movie or something, only because Justin Timberlake was making obscene money from that, but they don't do what all the other 90s, 2000s bands do, like Backstreet Boys and the Spice Girls and all of the other ones, O-Town. They all go and do like nostalgia concerts, and even some of them have combined and done little 90s events, but NSYNC can't, because they can't use the name without Justin agreeing to it, because again, everything was set up with Justin at the forefront, because he always has to be the one getting the most out of something. And if NSYNC go and tour, he's not getting anything out of it unless he's involved, but he doesn't want to be involved. And the way that he talks about NSYNC and his time in it, it's like he's ashamed of it. And it's one of those things where you shouldn't forget where you came from. That band absolutely made your career. You would have nothing without them. And why is it that those four guys can't do anything without your say so? A little personal aside is I just really, really don't like when people forget where they came from. And I can't find this exact clip. I might be able to find it while I'm editing, but it stuck so much in my mind because I dislike this so much, when people don't appreciate their past or the people that helped them get somewhere. And Justin Timberlake was on, I think it was Good Morning America, and they were playing one of like the really popular NSYNC songs, like Bye 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 or something. And one of the hosts said to him, "Oh, do you know this song?" Like joking around. And he was completely stone-faced and just was like, no. And it wasn't a joke, it wasn't sarcasm, like nothing. And it's just so rude. And I just don't like it. I know that I try not to editorialize too much, but that really annoyed me, because I just think that you really should recognize not only the people that helped you get there, but your fans. Like, there's so many NSYNC fans that would love for a concert or just even something on social media, anything at all. And it's just as if NSYNC never existed to him. So now we're going to be moving towards present day. I want to talk about his marriage to Jessica Biel, what he's been doing over the recent years, and the latest issues with him with his DUI, and also everything that's been happening with his world tour. So let's get into the next chapter. So for our final chapter, I want to discuss some of the controversies, stories, and mainly relationships that I haven't covered yet. And I will also tell you a story that you definitely won't have heard about Justin Timberlake, because it involves one of my family members' interaction with Justin Timberlake. One just caveat about this chapter is that a lot of the stuff that I'm going to discuss is things that people within she's going crazy, within Hollywood have discussed amongst each other. It's not things that you're going to find in grocery store magazines, although there is something that I will reference that went into a grocery store magazine. But there are a lot of things that I've heard from people that have worked on productions with Timberlake, or friends of friends and things like that. And there's plenty of other people that have also discussed some of these things, but it's not something that you're going to see on like E! News, for example. So I know we just had a chapter on Britney, but I do just want to discuss the actual like cheating that was allegedly done by Justin Timberlake. And in Britney's book, she says that she didn't want to disclose who the person was because the woman has a family now. And most people believe that there's many, many, many women and not just one. And that is certainly a pattern that you're going to see throughout the rest of this chapter, that allegedly Justin Timberlake is a prolific cheater. So most people have said that the woman that Britney Spears is referring to in her book that Justin Timberlake cheated with is Alyssa Milano. And if you've seen my WB video, you know, she also has some other controversies. If you haven't seen that video, I'll link it in the cards. I talk about a lot of WB shows and behind the scenes stuff, and Charmed is one of the shows I discuss. So that is who most people believe is like the main person that is talked about in Britney's book. But there also was a woman in the UK that she actually is in a UK band that I don't think they had much fame outside of the UK. This was in like 2000, 2001, and I didn't move to the US till 2004. So I'm not sure whether they were famous in the US. I don't think so, because I never remember anybody else talking about them in the US, but I could be wrong. They're called All Saints, and the woman is called Nicole Appleton. And her and Justin Timberlake were photographed leaving a nightclub, and they were like driving out the car, but they are trying to like shield themselves from the paparazzi. And when the pictures were printed in the paper, they had multiple sources saying that they had seen something going on between the two of them. They were in like a bar or a nightclub or something, and that was printed in UK newspapers. I did go and find the picture, but this picture and a couple of other things in the video, especially the radio interview where Justin Timberlake says, "Oh yeah, I did it," and he's speaking about sleeping with Britney, those were so difficult to find. And it was only because I remembered from 20 years ago, that radio interview, because I think that there's a lot of things that he has tried to have scrubbed from the internet. I could only find this picture on like one person's Tumblr from years and years ago. And he has always had pretty good PR and management. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, because it does happen quite a lot. Although I know Google at the moment is using AI, so that could also be a factor. But there were a couple of things that I just found it really strange that they were so difficult to find. So speaking of Britney Spears' book, I want to jump to another blonde 2000s pop superstar's book, and that is Jessica Simpson. And she actually talks about her hookup with Justin Timberlake, and it is not a good experience either. In the book, she said that they were hooking up, and I think it was at her house, maybe it was at his house. And straight afterwards, he literally is on his phone, and they've just been kissing, and she's like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you stopping kissing me to text?" And he said, "Oh, I have to text Ryan Gosling because we made a bet about who would hook up with you first." And is that a crime? No. But I just think it's another little thing that feeds into the narrative that Justin Timberlake is this massively, massively self-centered person who has a huge ego. And it certainly is ironic that he has been quoted as saying, "I don't want people to think I'm a self-obsessed sex machine." So think about that quote when you finish the video. I also think it's interesting that he says he doesn't want people to think that, not that he isn't that. Before we go on to Jessica Biel and Justin Timberlake, I just want to touch on the sort of behind the scenes allegations about Justin Timberlake. And that is that he is allegedly an absolute nightmare behind the scenes. And many people who have spoken to me about him and their involvement, whether it's like on projects with him or people that just live in LA and have encountered him in, working random jobs. And a lot of people that have worked on productions with him have likened him to Ellen. And that is another case where people had this amazing impression of them for years and years and years, and then it was like a swift change and it was like mask off basically. And most people report that he is just an absolute nightmare and one of those celebrities who doesn't want anyone to speak to him or look at him that is not a rich, powerful celebrity or director, producer. He doesn't basically want any normal, regular people to be in his vicinity and to have anything to do with him. He has crazy demands. I've also heard he has ridiculous riders, which, in case you don't know what that is, it's basically a list that a celebrity, it can be a singer if they're going to do concerts, or actors, or even guests on talk shows, they will have this list of things that they want in their dressing room or in the green room. And it can be as simple as, oh, I want a vanilla candle in the room. I want some Evian water, a couple of Diet Cokes, and some Doritos or something. But there's insane ones. I have seen insane. I mean, you look at it and you're like, you want all this stuff for a few hours. It can be just crazy. I should do a video on like the craziest riders that I've seen, because I just did a video on my Patreon for my best and worst celebrity encounters. So if you're interested in any extra content, my Patreon link is down below. But if Patreon isn't for you and you still want to support the channel, consider subscribing. It really, really helps me out, but absolutely no pressure. Just thank you for being here and watching. And to get back to Justin Timberlake, we'll now move over to his relationship with Jessica Biel. And that is certainly an interesting relationship, because most people, and this is spoken about, but it's not going to be in any like mainstream media or like magazines that you'd find in the grocery store. But many people believe that the reason that Jessica Biel puts up with all of his alleged cheating and just in general puts up with a lot of his behavior, like there's a lot of articles out right now, like why is she putting up with Justin Timberlake after his DUI? And that's because a lot of people allege that Jessica Biel doesn't mind because she bats on my team. And that is just something that is a very prolific rumor. Obviously, there's no black and white evidence for it, but most people have alleged that her assistant was someone that she was involved with. And there was also a restaurant that she owned. It actually was shut down. It was called A Fudge. And it was in LA, and it was like a posh West Hollywood place. And they actually got shut down because the employees filed a lawsuit against them. And it was for things like how they were treated. They allegedly got like breaks taken away from them and like lunches, and they just weren't in good working environments. But it was mainly because allegedly this restaurant had like tons and tons of private events, and they ended up keeping $500,000 of the staff's tips over, a long period of time. So the staff filed a lawsuit, and there was also money for damages too. And they actually ended up settling the lawsuit. It was, of course, for an undisclosed amount, and they had to sign non-disclosure agreements. And the reason I tell you that is because a lot of people have alleged and spoken about the fact that one of the female investors from that restaurant was who she was involved with. But again, that's all alleged. I'm just repeating information, and I invite you to make your own decision about that one. But involved with all of that is Justin Timberlake's numerous cheating allegations that have made it into the mainstream media, because there is a list a mile long. I think the very first one that was widely reported was, I believe the first one that was reported in the mainstream media was in 2010 with Olivia Munn, and that was actually in Us Weekly, which those magazines generally are running PR for actors, celebrities, singers. But also, when it comes to even websites like TMZ has never been sued for publishing false information. And I do think that that says something, that they, over all this time, with all of the things that they've put on their site and alleged, that no one has ever been able to say, that's false, I'm going to go after you. Of course, some of the stuff is so small and petty, it's probably not worth it. But when it's serious things like cheating and stuff, you would think there'd be someone who had gone after them. There was another situation with Justin Timberlake that was very publicly known, and this one actually had pictures that were printed, and this was with one of his co-stars, Alicia Wainwright, in December 2019. And this was another situation where the woman was absolutely attacked when it was Justin Timberlake who was the one who was married with a kid, and he was in public with his co-star. It was like a bar or a nightclub or something, and he was holding her hand and touching her knee and everything. The pictures got printed, and then he, of course, was saying, oh, nothing happened, and oh, I'm so sorry to my wife and my son. But I just find it really hard to believe that they're out together drinking, having some very PG PDA, and nothing happened. That seems very hard to believe. There's also, he had this weird feud with Prince where he was kind of rude to Prince. He ended up picking up an award for him, and he made himself look as if he was really short and was mocking Prince kind of. And then Prince ended up saying something against what he'd done, and he's just had this weird feud with Prince kind of in the media. And then Prince had previously said he didn't like when artists did holograms and things like that. And then when Prince passed away, Justin Timberlake ended up performing with a hologram of Prince. And there's just so many other things. So as per usual, I'm jumping in at the end of the video to add a few of the things that I promised you that I forgot because I went on tangents off script and forgot to mention them. So the story about my relative, and also the Star Wars reference that I spoke about at the beginning. So Lou Pearlman had a ridiculous amount of Star Wars memorabilia, things from the set, props, costumes, just tons of really authentic Star Wars stuff that he had got from the films and from George Lucas himself. Sorry, my voice is going because I never stop talking. But the Star Wars thing is that he had all this stuff and a relationship with George Lucas because Pearlman invested $20 million into the production of Star Wars. And that I thought was just a crazy anecdote. And a lot of people, have described how his house was this teenager's sort of paradise where you could do whatever you wanted. And he had, jet skis and big flat screens and parties. And there's also, I've probably played B-roll of this at some time throughout the video, but there is actually, and this will be linked in the sources, there's actually a video of one of the Backstreet Boys' birthday or someone's birthday where the Backstreet Boys are all there. And it is very obvious that they are drinking and they're all underage, but Nick Carter is maybe 13, 14, really, really young. And that again is linked below. Again, 10 million things that I've said in this video that are just creepy as hell. And Lou Pearlman seemed to try and find any way that he could lure people in. And Star Wars, fancy toys, jet skis, all these things is just another string in his bow for being cool and trying to get in with these young, impressionable kids. And finally, the story about Justin Timberlake and one of my family members. This was actually involving my dad, and this happened in 2003, 2004. So he did tell me this at the time, but obviously that was a long time ago. And when I was speaking to him about it the other day, I was trying to get him to remember like as many details as he could. And he, his memory isn't the greatest, but he does remember key things of what was going on. And long story short, but my dad had this friend that he started off as like a colleague kind of, and they were the sort of person who just knew everyone. Like he had so many connections. And if you've ever seen that Ocean's 11 movie, there's a scene in the very beginning that's filmed at Derby Lane, a dog track in St. Pete. And I'm sure Tampa people know what I'm talking about, but they ended up filming that there because this guy like knew George Clooney or something, and he knows a ton of celebrities. And long story short, again, they ended up one day at going to this event thing, and he went to pick up Justin Timberlake he'd like flown in on like a private plane. I don't know, I can't remember if it was Orlando or Tampa that he'd gone into. And he ends up picking him up from like the private runway. And with private planes, you just pull your car up to the steps from the plane. So my dad said that he was in quite this, or allegedly was in quite the state when he got into the car, and the plane was just filled with women, alcohol, other things that you would think stereotypically would be on someone that was very prolific for things like cheating, had got a DUI. So it certainly lines up with like a lot of the things that I've discussed in this video. And again, it's a 20-year-old story, but ever since I heard that, like I was maybe like 15, 16 when he told me that, but I have always had it in my memory when I've read any stories, especially about him cheating and things, because I can't remember if he was in a relationship at that time, but it just, the way he was and the attitude and the way that my dad has spoken about how he was speaking about women and things, it definitely lines up. So that was just a small little personal anecdote. Again, it's like 20 years ago and I can't remember all the details. My dad couldn't remember all the details, but I was making a video on it, so I thought it was something to just add in there as another little piece of the Justin Timberlake puzzle. But now back to past me. And one of the final things to discuss is what I mentioned a second ago, Justin Timberlake's very recent arrest and charge with driving under the influence. He was pulled over 2 days after Father's Day on Tuesday, June 18th. He drove through a stop sign and was also swerving into the other lane and couldn't stay on the road. He was driving a Florida registered 2025 BMW. And if you remember back to when I was discussing his other driving incident, he was driving a BMW back in 2000. You know what they say about BMW owners? Joking for any BMW owners. But Timberlake was pulled over just after midnight in the affluent Hamptons area of Long Island. And when he was asked to submit to a field sobriety test, he apparently said, "This is going to ruin the tour." And the police officer asked him what tour, because he had never heard of Justin Timberlake before. And Justin Timberlake apparently replied, "The world tour." So when the cop asked him to submit to a sobriety test, he said no, he wasn't going to give a sample for a breathalyzer. And then he was asked how much he had to drink. He said he had one martini, despite the fact that the officer said his eyes were completely bloodshot, which they certainly look like that in the mugshot. And he also apparently smelled of alcohol, was slurring his words, and just looked like he was intoxicated. And in the mugshot, it certainly looks like he's had much more than one martini. The cop also said that he was unable to divide his attention, he had slowed speech, and when he got out to perform one of the field sobriety tests, he was unsteady on his feet and he performed it very poorly. He was unable to walk heel to toe or stand on one foot without swaying or using his arms to balance. The officer then again asked him to do a breathalyzer sample. He said no, and he said he wasn't going to do any chemical tests. He was asked for a third and final time to submit to a breathalyzer test, and he again said no. That was when he was arrested, and he ended up being arraigned. He actually was released without having to post bail. He was released about 9 hours after he was arrested, and immediately his mugshot and him leaving the police station, pictures of that were shared all over the internet. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the video, it has been a long discussed topic about Justin Timberlake's issues with alcohol and substances. I do think that finally all of this stuff has caught up with him, because for a long time he just was untouchable and seemed to get away with everything. I think that too, he had pretty good like PR and management, and then his mom seems to be like very involved. She, even when he was a kid, seemed like her number one goal was to make him famous. So it seems like he's had a lot of people working on his side forever to build this whole thing up. People are really finally seeing that Justin Timberlake has always been this way. He's always been incredibly self-obsessed, and he's always been someone who will use people for media attention, for career prospects, for financial gain, and then drop those people when they are no longer useful to him. All he cares about is being rich, being famous, and getting attention. And he doesn't care about what price other people have to pay for him to get and maintain those things, whether it's the multiple women that he's destroyed in the media or taking reckless decisions with other people's lives, like driving while clearly intoxicated, because the only person who matters to Justin Timberlake is Justin Timberlake. So those are many, but not all, of the controversies of Justin Timberlake, and I'm very curious to know what you guys think. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much. If you did, leave MVP and a little emoji below so I can personally thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, consider subscribing. Check out some of my other videos if you're looking for something else to watch. All of my social media and my cat Miss G's are linked down below, and my Patreon is down there too if you'd like some more content. I will hopefully be back very soon with a new video. As always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.